like is I need a little bit more Jesus. You know, we have these kind of seasons in the church calendar, and I'm craving those just stories of Jesus that resonate with us and stick with us and ask us those questions that help us to grow. And these are good stories to read during ordinary time. So, as you can see, I've put back on my green stole. This is ordinary time from now until the first Sunday of March. That's when Lent begins. So we're gonna get back to our Jesus, and we're gonna learn how to live with joy. And so Nancy is here to read our first story. It's from the Gospel of Luke. It's quite short, but Jesus likes small things. So there's a lot of meaning in these small verses.
Okay, this morning's scripture is from Luke 9:46-50. An argument arose among them as to which one of them was the greatest. But Jesus, aware of their inner thoughts, took a little child and put it by his side and said to them, "Whoever welcomes this child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For the least among all of you, is the greatest." John answered, "Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he does not follow us." But Jesus said to him, "Do not stop him, for whoever is not against you is for you." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Oh, gracious God, we ask you to fill us now with the words of my mouth and through the prayers of all of our hearts. Oh God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So, you know, during the season of Advent, there are 4 Sundays, 4 candles, and each one has a theme. And so we use that theme to guide us through Advent. And each of those themes are hope, peace, joy, and love. And every year, by the time we get to Christmas and the end of Advent, I realize that it's really hard. Those 4 themes kind of become indistinguishable. That hope, peace, joy, and love they all inform the other. They all interact with themselves. And so you can't really be a person of love without having hope for those you love. You can't have joy if you don't have peace. And so it's really hard to separate them out, at least for me. They all kind of start to become part of the same thing. In our Bible study series that we just wrapped up in December, we used Brian McLaren's book, We Make the Road by Walking, which is a book I would highly recommend to anybody at any time. And he uses this theme, this kind of key question to drive his book. What is the purpose of a life of faith? And he says the purpose of a life of faith is to be fully alive. Maybe that sounds just a little bit obvious, like, yeah, it is good to be alive. You should be alive. But what he means is this combination of hope, peace, joy, and love. This idea that there is a way to fulfill something that is deep within you, and that faith can help you find that fulfillment, that contentment. And I think you can use any one of these 4 words to have a feeling of joy. So we are going to be using this book for the next ordinary time until the end of February. This is called The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. They had a conversation with each other. These men are world leaders, global leaders, spiritual leaders, but because of their place, they've also become political leaders. So the Dalai Lama is a Tibetan monk, the leader of the Buddhist monks from Tibet. And if we know a little bit about world history, he and his people are refugees. They've had to leave their homeland. They've had to leave Tibet, and they live in India. And so because of that, he's become a political leader as well. And then Archbishop Desmond Tutu, we might be a little bit more familiar with because he is part of our faith tradition. He's part of the Anglican Church, which is connected to the Church of England, in South Africa, which went through the horrible apartheid. And he was a vocal opponent of apartheid and then helped the country recover from that and find healing. So he has become a little bit of a political leader as well. So because of their stature in the world, these two men have been friends throughout their life, and they've seen each other at different meetings and summits and things. And one of them had a birthday, one of those birthdays that ends in a 0, and they decided that, they wanted to spend some time with each other, and they wanted to spend some time talking about joy. And so I'm sure their teams worked this all out, and they invited this journalist, Douglas Abrams, to come and kind of be a moderator and to write things down and to put all their thoughts in an organized book so that all of us could benefit from what these two wise men know about joy. And what I have found in reading this book so far is that when they use this word joy, it's kind of like joy in the sense of the Advent themes, because hope, peace, and love all get pulled into it. So joy is not just about how to be happy or how to not have any worries in your life. It's really about that Brian McLaren question. How do we find ourselves fully alive? How can we be the people God created us to be? How can we find that contentment, that fulfillment, that idea that we are being faithful to God's call in our life? The answer to that question for me connotes peace and joy and hope and love. So this is called the Book of Joy, but it's not a self-help book. It's not how to, be carefree. It's about how to be fully alive. So if you'll consent, that's what we will do for the next several weeks. They have 8 obstacles to joy, 8 things that get in the way of us living that fully joyful life. And then 8 pillars of joy, 8 things that if we cultivate these pillars, we are going to find more joy in our life. So the first pillar, the first obstacle is fear, anxiety, and stress. And boy, we talk about this a lot, right? For some of the reasons Tim just had to tell us about. He's required to do that once a year, and we're really grateful to him that he takes on that task of learning and education and then takes that burden of educating us. But those are some of the things that we think about all the time. They're on the news and they cause us anxiety and stress. The Dalai Lama, of course, he's Buddhist, so he's coming from a different angle than we might normally think of. He says one of the main causes of stress is that our expectations do not meet our reality. And what we expect is perhaps too ambitious. So we have these expectations that are so lofty, we probably could never meet them. And so we walk around with these feelings that, boy, we just aren't good enough. We aren't this enough. We aren't that enough. We're too much of this and not enough of that. I read an article recently that had all of these ways that we can judge ourselves now. Are you happy at work? Are you happy at home? Are you happy in your marriage? Are your kids well behaved? Are they achieving? How does your home look? Because now we have HGTV, that channel that helps us to see everyone else's home. So now we can compare our homes to other people's homes. And if that wasn't enough, now we carry around a little machine in our pocket and we can just view pictures of everybody else's life all the time and always be comparing ourselves. And this list of all these things, it ended with, and are you recycling, right? Just the amount of ways that we can judge whether or not we're living the right kind of life. No one can meet all of those expectations. In our American culture, we have this value or this ideal that we want to strive. We value ambition. We value ambitious people. And here's the Dalai Lama saying, maybe you have too much ambition, too much for your own good. So it makes us ask a question. Are the things we are striving for the right things? Are our expectations the right ones to have? And so he recommends asking yourself, what is it that you really want in life? And what we really want often is love and connection. We want belonging. We want a community, a family of love where we can give ourselves to others and we can receive other people the same way. But often, our expectations just don't match. We have this idea that we have to be always striving, always working, always reaching for the next thing. But that leads to stress. And actually, we have a lot of phrases in the English language that can describe this, when we are just trying to do too much and reach too far in too many areas. We can say someone will spread too thin, or burning the candle at both ends, or I'm so behind I will never catch up. Has anyone ever said anything like that? Right? I mean, think about what that means. You're being pulled in all of these directions, which means you are not present where you are. You're not appreciating the moment because you're thinking about all the places you have to be. And makes me feel stressed just thinking about that. When to find joy is to be present in the moment, to be centered. Now, none of us are just going to wake up tomorrow and be like, well, I don't want to be spread too thin, so I'm just going to forget all this stuff. I mean, that's not really the way life works. You still have to invest yourself in a lot of different areas. But what these two men are recommending is not that we see all of these stressors as a threat, like this is taking away too much and I just have to guard myself against it and I have to protect. They're saying use your stressful opportunities as challenges. How can I connect with others through these stressful things of life? So Archbishop Tutu says, he suffers from insomnia. And when he finds himself awake in the middle of the night, instead of getting angry, he thinks about all the other people in the world who are awake and not able to sleep just like him. And then he decides he's going to pray for them. Can you see the difference there? I mean, which one of us has not woken up in the middle of the night? And usually my reaction is to be angry that I am awake. Anger does not help you relax and calm down and go back to sleep. But what he is doing is he's thinking of all these other people. And so suddenly he's not all by himself. He's connected around the world to other people who are suffering just like he is, and he's praying for them. He's giving himself to them in prayer, and it helps him find peace so that he can go back to sleep. There is this idea that separation causes stress. When you are pulled in too many directions, it causes stress. When you are too separate from the other people in your life, that causes you stress and anxiety. But connection, coming together, remembering that you are part of a much greater community, that brings peace and joy. And this, friends, really resonates with Jesus' message. Jesus' central message, the greatest commandment, to love God and to love others as you love yourself. The greatest commandment is one of connection. When you love God, you are loving others. When you're loving others, you are loving God. And it plays out in this story with Jesus and his disciples that we read this morning. So his disciples are arguing over which one is best. When I was younger and I read this passage, I used to think very literally that the disciples were saying, I'm the best disciple. No, I'm the best disciple. And maybe it happened that way. But now I have been in enough of these kinds of conversations to know that we humans are very smart. And we use very sophisticated language to kind of hide what we're really doing. So we don't go around and saying, I'm the best disciple, but we might say, I just don't understand how some people can believe that da-da-da-da-da-da, right? Or I don't understand why more people don't understand things the way I see them, and that this is so obvious, da-da-da-da-da. I know that this is how we say these things because that's how I say them. When I am proving that I am quite clearly the better disciple than somebody else who does not see things the same way. So we definitely still have this conversation. The disciples are having that kind of conversation, and Jesus hears. And Jesus always hears with his ears, but with his heart as well. And he can see what's happening in the hearts of the disciples when they are talking. He can see that at best, this kind of competition or ambition to be the best is going to lead to discord, at best. And eventually will lead to bitterness and hatred and one-upsmanship. And eventually, if left untreated, that kind of thing leads to violence. And so Jesus speaks directly to them. And in his perfect Jesus way, he does not talk directly, but he uses an example. And he finds this child. Now, where this child is, I don't know. Just walking by and Jesus just pulls him in, I don't know. But there's a child nearby, and Jesus, I imagine he goes up and he puts his arm around this child, and he says, "Whoever welcomes this child welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me." Now, as I was trying to explain with the kids, children in those times were not held special. There was no earlier learning center back then. There wasn't public education. No one invested in children because they were a burden. They didn't bring anything in, and you had to pay an awful lot to take care of them. So children were not special. They were a responsibility and a burden, and not seen as a person of value. But Jesus reaches out to them and pulls them in, and then he equates that child with himself. He equates the two. He says, whenever you love this child, you love me. And if you love me, then you love God. So he is making this connection. The disciples want to be ambitious and prove that they are better than one another and set themselves apart and say, I am different than you because I am better. Jesus is reaching out to this child and saying, I am actually the same. I am the same as this one that you think is so lowly. We are connected. And then one of his disciples, John, poor John, just does not understand what is happening here. And he thinks, well, okay, I'm not going to be better than the disciples, but I got to be better than somebody, right? And so he said, but Jesus, I saw this guy the other day, and he's not even one of us. And he was healing people in your name, and don't worry about it. I told him to stop because he's not part of us. Poor John thought he was going to get an attaboy, like, oh, good job. Thanks for being diligent, John. But that is not what happened. Jesus said, don't stop them. Don't ever stop anybody that is healing someone else. If they are not working against you, they are with you. Jesus is opening up the community to so far beyond what the disciples understand. If they are not working against you, then they are with you. If they are not doing evil things, then they are doing the things of God. If they are healing people and giving people hope and new life, then they are with you. You are the same as them. That is a lesson John couldn't quite grasp, and probably no Christian ever since has grasped either. We always want to think we're better than. And Jesus is saying, you all are part of the same community. And ultimately, that is what will give you peace when you are connected to one another. So how can we foster a life of connection and seeing that we are not so set apart, but we are together? Well, one of the pillars of joy that they outline in this book is the pillar of humor. That humor is actually really important. And I was really grateful to see this because we laugh in church a lot, right? We laugh in church a lot. And sometimes I'm a little nervous about that. Like, are we having too much fun? Are we allowed to have this much fun in church? And sometimes I remind myself, well, but we're serious during the sermon, so it's okay. We can laugh during other parts of church. But here are two wise spiritual leaders who say, no, it's not only okay that you laugh in your life of faith, but you actually need it. You need it. On Christmas Eve, during our early service, we probably had, 60 people here. And I was giving the message and standing up front. And, that's a service where there's a lot of young families and it's really wiggly. And so it's a little bit casual. And I said something, I don't know what it was, but I said something in that message where I thought was kind of funny and that people would laugh. And crickets. Like nobody responded, And I was like, do I need to say that again? And I realized it was because on Christmas Eve, about half of the congregation are people who are not part of our regular congregation. We have a lot of guests here, so we're all on our best proper behavior. And all of those guests don't know that it's okay to laugh in church. Somewhere along the way, and I don't know how, but church got this reputation for being somber and serious and stilted, and that's just not a life of faith that's going to get you very far. It's not real, right? We need to laugh. In the first place, life is really hard out there. It is really hard, and it is really somber, and it's really sorrowful. And if God's way is different than the world's way, and the world just brings us a lot of pain, then God's way must bring us some levity. It must bring us some laughter. So we need to laugh. The other thing that humor does is that it breaks down that fear. If you can laugh at something, then it's not quite so scary. Tim even did this when he's talking about gun violence. That was pretty amazing, Tim. That was like next level humor, because he pointed to Kelly back there and said, "Oh no, don't worry, Kelly's got us covered." And we all laughed. We all laughed because it connected us to this moment of like, oh my gosh, we don't want to imagine the worst, but even in the worst, we are still together. Even in the worst, God is still with us. How many times have you known somebody who is struggling with a really serious illness, but they were still able to find some humor in things? And if you've been in the room when they crack a joke, it just kind of reminds you, this is the worst, but we are still here, and life is still good, and life continues, right? We see this kind of idea in literature all the time, that humor can take the bite away from something that's fearful. Like in Harry Potter, I don't know if we have any Harry Potter fans, but those young wizards have to learn how to handle a dangerous creature. This creature is called a Bogart, and it's a shapeshifter. So it will take on the appearance of whatever you are most afraid of. So the professor opens the closet, and this Bogart appears, and in front of the first student, it turns into a giant spider, like an 8-foot tall spider, right? Because some of us are afraid of spiders. And so the way to make that Bogart not so scary anymore is to make it look ridiculous. In fact, that is the name of the charm. You wave your wand and shout, "Ridiculous!" And the spider all of a sudden has roller skates over every leg, and it slips around and it just spread eagle right on the floor. And then it's not so scary. How can you be afraid of a spider that has just fallen down wearing roller skates? Another boy is afraid of the meanest teacher at the school, and he's just menacing, and he's out to get him. And so the Bogart turns into this teacher, and he shouts, "Ridiculous!" And he's like wearing a mini pearl hat and like a moo-moo and holding a little cup of tea, and he's not funny. He's not scary anymore because he's funny. If we can laugh at something, then it brings it out into the open, and we can talk about it. And Mr. Rogers had this great line, "Anything mentionable is manageable." And anything human is mentionable, and anything mentionable is manageable. So if you talk about it, and if you make fun of it a little bit, it suddenly loses its power over you. The other great thing about humor is that it humanizes us. And in fact, the author points out, the word humor and the word human come from the same root word. I had never thought about that before. Humor and human, they're really tied closely together. When you can find the humor in a situation, it diffuses all those differences, all that tension, and it makes us all part of the same team. If you can laugh at yourself, if you spill something on yourself or something, everybody's had that experience. If you laugh at it, then everyone says, "Oh, I do that too. I do that too." Now you're connected. You have a little bit of a relationship there, right? Desmond Tutu had to use this a lot. That man has spent his life in extraordinarily tense situations. He had to travel to Rwanda and to talk to people who had just experienced genocide. People who had been at war with each other. One group of people who thought another group shouldn't exist. And so he told a story about the people with big noses and the people with little noses, and how they just didn't like each other, and the people with the big noses didn't want to be around the people with little noses. And he told it in such a way that people started laughing because they could see, this is really ridiculous. And then it helped them to see, every time we judge each other, it's really ridiculous. Lily talked about Martin Luther King Jr. When I try to teach my kids about segregation, it sounds ridiculous to separate people based on a color. Right? So humor can break down the things that we're afraid of, and it builds a connection. And it shows us, humans are all ridiculous. Some of us try to think we're really sophisticated and we're above it all, and we try to do that disciple thing of saying, "Oh no, we're so much better than, we've got it all figured out." But we haven't. There are some ways that we are all a little bit ridiculous. And if we can laugh at it, we will have a lot more peace. We'll have a lot more connection. So they have a practice for us, a challenge for us this week, so that we can cultivate this idea of humor in our lives and cultivate a path of joy in our lives. And so the first thing is to find something about yourself that it's just a little ridiculous. Just a little foible you have, just a human limitation, something that's a little bit, you just can't get any better at it. So like for myself, I love a good cup of coffee. My coffee is like my friend in the morning. It's my companion at work. I love a cup of coffee. And because of that, I can never just dump it out and leave it. It's like feeling like I'm abandoning a friend. So I just leave that cup of coffee on my desk for days and days and days. And then like once a week or so, I collect up all the coffee cups and I take them into the kitchen. I think, isn't this ridiculous? Why don't I just do this one at a time? No, that's how I am, right? So find something about yourself that's just a little bit silly. And then number 2, find a way to laugh at it. Because we can be sensitive to these things, right? And feel like, oh, I should be better at this. Why can't I get this right? Who cares? Just laugh at it a little bit. And you'll find that other people struggle with that too. So find something ridiculous about yourself and then make a joke out of it. Learn to laugh at it. And then the third step is laugh at life. Laugh at the things around you. When things are not going your way, you can respond in anger and frustration, or you can just sit back and laugh a little bit. I like sitcoms, so I like to pretend that I'm in a sitcom. This works really well if you ever have to travel and your airplane is delayed. And you can just sit back and like start picking off the cast of characters. Like, there's the guy who's really mad and thinks he's the only one on the plane who needs to get anywhere. Or there's the mom who has been traveling for what feels like 4 days and she just wants to get home, and every article of clothing she has is stained by some bodily fluid. And here's the man who cannot remember where his boarding pass is ever, and he's searching for it every time. And you can just start telling the story, right? You can do this at church, too, by the way. In fact, some of my best sitcoms, in the 1990s, the BBC came up with this sitcom called The Vicar of Dibley. And it was this little country parish, and they get their first woman vicar. And half the show is when they're at the council meetings. And it's so funny, but it's also endearing, right? When you can see that every person is playing this character, it's funny, but you also realize that they're all together. They're all part of the same cast of characters. And they put up with each other's little weirdisms because they love each other, because they need each other, because they are all disciples. And they might have that moment where they want to prove that they're better than the rest of them. But at the end of the day, they're all there because they love Jesus. And Jesus all loves them. And when they love one another, they are loving Jesus. And God is present with them. So let's laugh at each other just a little bit, because as we do, we'll be knowing that God is with us, that God's bringing us all together, and that will lead us to a life of joy. Thanks be to God. Amen.